Vane.
Hold on, let me mute the stream. And I'm sorry in advance for my anime profile picture. I'm here to talk to you about. So I watched that Irish Laddie X Skills Me
Mm-hmm.
debate, and I was really upset because Irish Laddie fumbled questions about market socialism, and
Mm-hmm.
X Skills Me went on like a huge tangent about how market socialism doesn't exist and it's some bullshit made up term. And I just want to have you ever like, do you know what a worker-owned cooperative is?
Isn't that just like a place that's like the ownership is shared by all the workers? There's not like an initial capital investor or something, or
Well, there can be an initial capital investment, right? But the ownership of the company itself, there's not like a typical hierarchy
uh,
of like owner. Like the board of directors is the workers typically.
yeah. I'm sorry. When I say investor, I mean there's not like one guy that owns like 55 or 51% of the share of the company or some shit, right? That it's that
Yeah,
the
right.
ownership is shared between all the
Um,
workers. Yeah.
so the idea behind market socialism and like a big proponent of democratic socialism is the idea by that when we democratize the workplace, right, we have essentially corporations end up becoming these worker-owned cooperatives, right? So you don't need a command economy, you don't need any sort of central planning because individually these companies operate functionally, like consequentially, the same way, but with worker ownership instead of like the capitalist hierarchy.
Yeah, I understand that. That's Irish Lighter's whole point behind market socialism, right?
Yeah, but when I watched the debate, it seems like you guys nailed them pretty hard on that being like a pseudo command economy, and I like disagree entirely.
I don't think he must have said something different because I'm aware of his economic stance, and I don't think that socialism necessitates a command economy. Oh, it might have been when I argue with some people, I don't like the idea that socialism is supposed to fix things like climate change or global warming. To do that, I think you would need a command economy.
Well, so okay, so when if we want to fix something like climate change or global warming, what's the
Hmm.
difference between because a socialist economy can have regulation on its market, right? Just
Yeah,
the
so
same way
can
a
a
capitalist
capitalist
economy
one.
have.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. So well, you don't it doesn't necessitate a command
Oh yeah.
economy.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. When I say so regulation or command economy, but sure, but regulation as well. I guess like to be more clear, like my issue was like I think it was I want to say Hassan and Irish Lady, but it might have been just Hassan that was saying this was making it sound like just by virtue of being socialist, having a having like a socialist economy would help things like climate change, and that capitalism can't do
Mhm.
it. But I don't think that's true, especially in a market socialist economy. That like worker firms could just as easily vote to like pollute the air and everything just as anybody else would.
Absolutely, but do you think that firms would have a more vested interest in protecting their environment than a capitalist-owned firm when rich capitalists would have an ability to avoid the negative effects of climate change, whereas a more profit share-oriented worker system, they wouldn't be able to necessarily,
No, not at
right?
all. I think it could be just the same. The problem with pollution isn't that like firms don't care about like whether or not they're being affected by it. The problem is that we are oftentimes not the ones directly affected by it. That's the problem. So like for instance, if I pollute the fuck out of a river, as long as I live upstream from it, I'm fine. So like, would a worker firm that's like working, to fuck up a river for another firm downstream, would they give a fuck? If they can still get clean water? I don't necessarily know if they would. They don't in capitalism, right? I don't know if they would intrinsically in socialism. Same
Okay,
thing with
yeah.
like pollution. Yeah, yeah. Sorry, go.
I don't necessarily disagree with that. Like the
Mm-hmm.
big point that socialists and commies usually have is like that kind of movement needs to be global because we just end up being a socialist America exploiting the third world's labor for normal profit memes, and like the same thing would be true of climate change, right?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
But that's why like a more federalist socialist system would have some sort of market regulation that would prevent that. Like what is your big problem with socialism? Like do you not believe in a democratic workplace?
No, I think that it could work. I just don't know if I agree with the abolishment of capital or the abolishment of capitalists. Does that make sense? Like, I don't think
Maybe. What do you
owning
mean by
capital
capital
like
and capitalism?
unilaterally it should be bad.
Okay, but what about the means by which you derive that capital? Because theoretically, in democratic workplace, all the workers could get together to vote one guy as their CEO, and they could vote to give him a huge fat fucking paycheck, and
Hmm.
then that guy can go out and buy all the nice cars he wants and shit, right? So he would kind of be like a capitalist. He just wouldn't have his control would be democratic. It would be earned, right? As opposed to the way it is in this system where you kind of just like trace your lineage back to whoever, fucked over somebody else hard enough, right?
Maybe. But I mean, like right now in today's capitalist economy, I mean, like you could do all of what you're talking about right now, right? If you wanted to make like a worker collective, like you have the ability to do that now. No?
Oh, of course, yeah, and that's what democratic socialists strive for, right? Is on a
Yeah. So if
local
they do
level
it, I
to
think that's
start.
awesome. If they do it and it works, that's awesome. Like my opinion on socialism would be radically changed if there was like a lot of these really successful co-ops. Like if I
Oh,
went,
I have a study for you. The productivity effects of worker participation, producer cooperatives, and Western economies. I'll link it to you.
Sure. So
Worker
regardless of what,
cooperatives
so
are
like,
really effective.
yeah. So regardless of what your study says, so like, if you link me a study that says like, oh, well, they're 150% more effective, my first question is, well, why are they more common? Like,
They're not more common because they don't allow for the same kind of like capital. I don't like consolidation that a traditional corporate structure works for.
sure,
Also,
but
the structure of society lends towards building corporations in a traditional way. By making a worker cooperative, you're relying on resources that don't necessarily exist everywhere, right? Plus, like, there's lots of propaganda against unions, much less making a cooperative, right? Like the social environment is not necessarily ripe for making worker cooperatives right now. In that way, it might be harder to create a cooperative, but once it's created and formulated, it seems to have better outcomes.
okay, I feel like if this was true, I feel like there would be more pushes towards making like co-ops. I feel like this would just be something that people would start to gravitate towards if they were actually more successful. No?
Well, do you agree that unions are generally beneficial for workers and helpful for them in many ways?
Yeah.
Okay.
Depending, but yeah. Go ahead.
Do you recognize that there are like actors in companies that prevent people from forming unions, and that there is like
Oh
a
yeah, for
like
sure.
people are naturally distrustful of unions for reasons that
For
aren't.
due to American propaganda, yeah, for sure. Well, especially in today's day and age. Yeah, I don't think it was always like that, but today, yeah, people shit on
Yeah,
unions.
and that same kind of thing applies to worker cooperatives, right? If you can't even convince your coworkers to unionize, how could you convince them to take a chance on a cooperative, right?
Well,
Like that
sure, but
kind
this
of.
isn't like helping your argument. Then it sounds like they need to do more like fucking public outreach or some shit. I mean,
Oh no, absolutely.
mhm.
Education outreach is like a huge. That is the problem with cooperatives. It's not like the financial, economical ramifications of cooperatives because they seem to have good outcomes. It's the social requirements for creating a cooperative, right? It's the fact that Americans
Mhm.
are very distrustful of anything that's like socially owned or cooperative. They're very distrustful of like, funnily enough, like democratic things. Like they, for some reason, it seems like Americans like having somebody to tell them what to do, right?
Sure. I mean, yeah. I mean, if they work, then hold on one second. Fucking Christ. Sorry. Okay, sorry. Keep going.
Hold on, I'll link you the study. And there's if you just Google the name of the study, you can get a PDF. That's like the abstract. But generally, in my opinion, from what I've seen, the reason why cooperatives aren't more popular, the reason why they aren't everywhere, is because of like we live in a capitalist structure, right? Like business schools aren't pumping out people that talk about cooperatives, right? Like X Skillsme was talking about how like no serious economist believes in market socialism. It's because the economy or the economics that we teach in schools is about marginalism. It's not about socialism. It's not about market socialism. It's not about Marxism, right? I mean,
Mhm.
you can go to any business school in the United States, and they're going to be teaching you contemporary economics based off the theories of marginalism, which goes against socialism, right? Like they aren't talking about necessarily labor theory of value, even though it's like Adam Smith in these college classrooms.
Okay.
And it's like when you build a structure or a system that pumps out corporations in the manner that we currently have them, well, going against the norm is going to be difficult, right? Like the
Sure.
reason why we don't have more of them is by nature of the system.
Sure. Yeah, I don't have any problem with people like I mean like I'm whatever produces the best outcomes is generally what I'm in favor of. So like if worker cooperatives, if more education was done on them, and I mean even if they weren't that good, I mean educating people on other things is good. And I mean if they were, then yeah, getting people to form things like this is probably beneficial. I don't see, at least in our current economy, why you wouldn't want things like that, right? Things producing goods for people at cheaper prices with happier workers is probably a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Do you do you like hate the socialists in your community too, or just the commies, just the tankies? Where's the line?
Tankies are shit. I really don't like. I don't have a good relationship with like labor value theory. I don't understand, and I don't like the idea that like the exploitation of labor is inherent to the transaction of like labor versus employee or employer, or that like it's necessarily like a bad thing. I don't know.
Oh, dude. Okay, we can run down labor theory of value like super quickly, really easy. Okay,
Sure.
so labor theory of value. Okay, because we have this dynamic where when you apply your labor to a product, that gives it some kind of value, right?
Okay.
Like
Sure.
you understand that?
Yeah.
So the idea is that who gets that surplus value is the analysis of labor theory of value. Adam Smith originally was the guy who was like, this value should be like the price. Like these two things should be somewhat equal,
Okay.
right? Um, Marx, I believe, I haven't read a ton of Marx, but what I've learned from adjacent YouTube videos and bullshit like that, right? Is that Marx was looking at more like, well, we aren't really worried about price. What we're worried about is who gets this value, right? And so in our system, pretty much like a large majority of your surplus value goes to who hired you, right?
Sure.
And so
My and then my
Marxist,
issue with this transaction is I feel like value is created by both sides, and I feel like that's never acknowledged by lefties.
well, the capitalists give you the conditions by which to create the value, right?
Correct. Yeah.
But without the labor to be there to actually create the value, the conditions are meaningless. If I have a bunch of wood lying around and no one to make them into a product, I just, right?
Sure, but if you've got a bunch of people ready to cut down trees and nobody to supply the axes, they're worthless as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But the problem is that a laborer, like they can come together collectively to find the axes, make the axes, do these things, right? Where a capitalist, if he can't find anyone to work for him, he's fucked, right?
Well,
Like the
kind of, but
ownership of capital.
those laborers could be fucked as well. Like the laborers could get together and find everything to do it, but they're going to be able to do it less efficiently or less effectively than a capitalist could.
Well, yeah, so less efficiently, less
Hmm.
effectively, absolutely, right? But there's at the end of the day, they can still do it. They can come together through social ownership and like
Well,
do
I mean,
these
if we're
things.
going to take that stance, I mean, like the capitalist could go and work on his own property, right? I mean, like,
Well, yeah, no, yes, absolutely. And
yeah.
everyone who looks at that admits that the capitalist can, on his own, do
Hmm.
all that shit, right? That's absolutely. But the problem is that, and if the capitalist did go on his own and use these materials to make the products, like his conditions to use his labor to
Hmm.
create that value, that's fine, right? That's not like theft or anything. But the problem is that's not what they're doing. They're using the material conditions they possess, usually through some kind of like violence or some kind of inherited means, right? I mean, if we trace back capitalism to its origins, it's whoever had the biggest army told other people to fuck off, right? Got a bunch of raw materials, got a bunch of resources, and made other
Sure,
people
but I
work
mean,
for
like,
it,
what
right?
was it? Who was it? Mao that said not Meow. I'm sorry. Wasn't it Mao the guy that was like, we're gonna go kill like literally every single fucking person that owns property and all the fucking shit to start farming in China or some shit? Like, didn't that happen as well? I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. But the problem is like once someone has taken something, they've entrenched themselves. I mean, there's
yeah,
an argument to
structurally
be
they are like perpetuated until like violent revolution, pretty much, right? I understand that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So the problem is like yes, absolutely, you have like these kind of violent takeovers on both sides. But the problem is that one side is like using that violence to say, well, we got ours. Like if you want it, I mean, too bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the socialists are kind of saying, like a social democrat would kind of say, well, the surplus value of your labor should be, because both sides contribute value,
Mm-hmm.
um, should be divided, evenly or more fairly towards the worker, right? You see this in like minimum wage increases and UBI and shit like that, right?
Yeah.
Where workers get more of their value, right? But a socialist would say, well, the capitalist isn't necessary for this equation. We have, if we take
Looks
the
like you had a
capitalist out of the
good time at
equation today,
Electric
right,
Pussycat,
we still
my
have the
dude.
necessary conditions in which to apply value. That might have been not have been true 100 years ago, right, or 200, 300 years ago, where
Mm-hmm.
you needed a capitalist to come together to find these materials to make the investments, right? That's not
Oh,
necessarily
sure.
true anymore, right? Now that we have governments and we have
Mm-hmm.
like
I mean,
countries
like,
that have
so, like,
resources.
my stance on this, and maybe this is like really sock them of me or whatever. Like, my stance on this is like, if we push through like reforms or education that lead people towards creating more co-ops, and that ends up being like a more effective way of like constructing our society, so products are made cheaper, workers are happier, people are
The
earning more
real
money.
tragedy of the poor is in
then,
the
I mean, I
poverty
think that would
of
be
their
like,
aspirations.
I think that would be good. I think that would be fine if that were to happen. Like I've heard of like employee-owned stores that give like stock and shit to employees and whatnot, and like if people come together and form businesses, yeah, I mean, I would have no problem with that. I don't think. I'm just not
So
a big
what do
fan
we
of like the violent overthrow of the current system to create something that might not work at all. I don't know about that.
So, but the problem is what do we do when the people who own the structures, who have the structural power, use that power to prevent like education and outreach, to prevent people from forming cooperatives, right? Because if you
I think
saw a
that's one of
swarm of
the yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. My problem there then is kind of I think goes back to maybe like campaign finance seems to be a problem, because right now it seems like a lot of the influence you have in the United States is directly related to how much money you have. Not even just campaign finance too, but the ability to pay for advertisements, the ability to influence Hollywood producers to make certain types of media, right? Like all of this, it's probably bad that like the profit motive can further entrench you, right?
yeah, I totally agree.
I don't know what the solution is for that. I don't know. I wish I had a good answer, but yeah, I don't like that.
I mean, I guess the solution is in the end we have to tackle all of these issues,
At the
right?
same time, yeah, which is sucks. It's really fucking complicated. I understand that, yeah.
All right, well, that's all I got. Thanks for talking to me, buddy.
All right, cool. I love you, buddy. Be careful.
Thanks.